Okay, welcome everyone to the Social Data Science Center Symposium at the University of Maryland, and happy Data Privacy Week. Annual celebration of all things privacy. So we wanted to have an event today to talk to you about some of the recent findings coming out of TAP, which is also known as the Transatlantic Privacy Perceptions Project. TAP is an interdisciplinary research project. You're seeing several of the folks who are part of TAP on the screen. You're going to hear from multiple ones today. And these are researchers in privacy, survey methodology, and sampling techniques at both the University of Maryland, the University of Munich, and beyond. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started today. The webinar is being recorded. It will be made available on the SoDa website next week. We'll have time for questions and comments at the end of the presentation. So we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A. And if you have a question as people are talking, feel free to use the Q&A feature at any time to ask a question. You also will have the opportunity to ask your question live. Just note the note, and we will call on you and ask you to unmute during the Q&A portion. So we're going to jump right in, and I will introduce the speakers as we go through them. First up, we're going to hear from Olga Kononykhina, who is a mid-career PhD researcher at LMU Munich. And Olga is going to introduce a new interactive data exploration tool we've developed that allows anyone to see and freely use the data that we collect in our semi-annual surveys. Olga, if you want to share your screen, and you can get started.
Hope you can see my screen.
We can.
Fantastic. So in my presentation, I would like to talk about the progress, like Jessica said, that we've made in 2023 in expanding our pool of experts, collecting quantitative data and making it fully available for everyone to use. I'll walk you through or remind you about the research project goals that we have, the ways how we collect the data, who are the stakeholders that we ask our questions, what are the results, and how exactly we visualize it. The main goal of the TAP project is to help policymakers, companies, and the public to learn more about current and future privacy concerns and how they can best be addressed through legislation and technological design. We want to give digital privacy a voice, which means to understand the perspectives of privacy stakeholders on the current situation, which means to capture their insights, expectations, and concerns for the future. We want to enrich the debate with actual data or new data, and we want to foster a more nuanced understanding of the challenges and opportunities ahead. Who are the how we collect the data? We collect the data in two ways, through online surveys and in-depth interviews. I will be covering the online surveys part, and the colleagues afterwards will talk more about in-depth interviews. So what about our online surveys? We ask stakeholders to participate repeatedly. This is what we call a panel survey. Each online survey lasts between 3 and 10 minutes. We have two parts in our surveys. One is the core part. Questions are being repeated once a year. This allows us to monitor the trends and shifts in opinions. And there are also rotating parts. It means that we introduce new questions to capture the current debate, for example, on AI and privacy. So far, we have conducted 3 surveys, and the next round is coming in April 2024. So who are the stakeholders who we invite to participate in our survey and provide their expert opinions? They're active members of the privacy debate, or they could be members of the professional privacy networks like IAPP, or they could be referred to us by other top panelists. And we screen all new coming participants to include only people that are professionally working in the privacy field. What it gives us two things. First, that on average, our respondents have more than 10 years of experience in the privacy field. And second, that the respondents are coming from diverse fields. They work in industry, both tech and non-tech. NGOs, media, government, law, and academia. We have finished 3 waves so far, and you can see we're expanding our pool of experts. We have started in the wave 1 with 64 experts. By the wave 3, we grew by 23%, and now we have 79 experts in our pool. And we're looking forward to the wave 4, hopefully that it will be even more participants. Now, what are we doing with all this data that we collect? And here our objective is that users or people like you can be informed about all the quantitative work that we are conducting. And that's why we developed a tool that visualizes all the survey results. We want to provide easy access to all the data that we collect. We want each visualization to be accompanied by a little interpretation. So even if you're not a privacy expert, you could get a little bit of understanding of what's going on. And the tool allows you to hopefully do it all by yourself, to work on your own and explore our findings as much as you want. And now let me show you how the tool works. I hope you can still see my screen. So our interactive data visualization tool consists of 5 tabs. First is the trend analysis. And here we show the results from the questions that were asked more than once. So our core questions. Then we have 3 tabs. For wave 3, the results came in December 2023. Wave 2, the results came in August 2023. Wave 1, the results came in October 2022. The last tab, it consists of information about accessing the raw data. Each of the tabs with the data has the same structure. One visualization shows the distribution of results to one specific question. Let me show you some results from the trend analysis. For instance, this chart shows the distributions of answers to the following question. Do you think current privacy laws in your region cover more areas than needed, fewer areas than needed, or all areas than needed? We have asked this question twice, in October 2022 and August 2023. Our experts had to choose between 3 options, that laws cover fewer areas than needed, all areas than needed, and more areas than needed. We separated our answers into 4 categories of stakeholders: practitioners from the United States, practitioners from Europe, academics from the United States, and academics from Europe. Each of the charts contains at least 2 buttons. One shows a small interpretation that can help you to understand how to interpret our data. For example, on this chart that you can see that there is a little bit more experts that say that the laws cover all areas than needed in 2023 than it was in 2022. Also, the perception of sufficiency of privacy laws vary greatly by the region. For instance, the majority of stakeholders from the United States, both from practitioners and academia, say that there are not enough privacy laws. However, 14% of practitioners in Europe and 12% of experts from academia in Europe believe that there are more laws than needed. The second button shows you the details of the sample. Here we can see that in the wave 2, we collected 74 answers from the experts, and in the wave 1, we collected 64 answers from the experts. Last but not least, if you like this chart or any other chart in our data exploration tool, you can save it on your computer clicking on this button. Now let's go to the chart number 2. It is important to know not only if there are enough laws, but also if the laws are enforced. Here we can see that, for example, 62% of our experts think that laws are somewhat enforced or mostly enforced. Again, it is important to see the results by the group of experts. And here the opinion divide is not by the region, but by the industry. For example, experts from the industry in both regions are more likely to believe that the laws are enforced compared to the experts from academia, regardless the region. Yeah, for example, for the practitioners in the USA, 63% believe that laws are at least somewhat enforced. For the academic expert from the United States, this number is only 43%. Next chart. Our experts here have rated the performance of firms and agencies in protecting digital privacy. According to our experts, companies like Meta, Google, Amazon are performing poorly in this aspect, and their numbers are not improving over time. Interestingly, experts show more trust in government agencies, such as statistical agencies, tax authorities, or social insurance authorities. One possible reason for this higher level of trust for the government agencies, like the US Census Bureau, is that they collect data for statistical purposes and are bound by strict user limitations. Companies, on the other hand, collect data from multiple sources for various purposes and in a least transparent process. Lastly, I would like to show you the very fresh results that we've just got in December 2023 about the generative AI and privacy policy. We asked experts if the rise of generative AI has changed their views on privacy policies. 66% said that it did. The opinion divide here, as you can see, is dual. On the one hand, experts in the United States agree with the statement more than experts in Europe. And also practitioners, both in the United States and Europe, said yes to the statement more frequently than academics in the United States and in Europe. So why is generative AI an important factor to rethink privacy policies? We asked experts to explain their views, and then we coded their open answers into 5 broad statements. For example, 44% of experts expressed concern about the use of data for purposes different from its original intent. For example, when your data are used for AI training without your consent. 38% mentioned the risks of social engineering and manipulation. For example, deepfakes. Inadequacy or lack of existing regulations were mentioned as a concern by 37% of our participants. Experts also highlighted their concerns for the need for mass data collection or aggregation to create quality AI products by companies. Finally, the lack of transparency in sources of training data was mentioned by 21% of respondents. These results are based on a sample of 79 respondents from the United States and Europe. So what I would like you to take from my presentation are 3 points. First, please go to the privacyperception.org results and explore our data, and I would really like to hear your feedback. Second, please give privacy your voice. Become our expert, because next survey will come in April 2024, and you can join the panel using the privacyperceptions.org/join. The third option is that you or the organization you represent could become a knowledge partner and propose a question or questions to the rotating part of our survey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olga. I know the development of this tool has been a labor of love, and it's nice to finally see it in action. I hope folks will give us some feedback and help us make it even better. We're going to transition right into the next part. So the 2 main teams, one has been focused on the surveys and now this tool. The other team is on qualitative analyses of expertise. And the team includes 4 folks. All 4 of us are on the call. It's myself, Katie Shilton, Anna Lenhart, and Minchong Kim. Katie and Minchong are going to be sharing a summary of findings from our interviews with US and EU experts. And just to give you a very brief introduction, Katie Shilton is an associate professor in the I School at the University of Maryland. And Anna is a PhD candidate in the I School. Minchong is a PhD student in the I School. I will pass it on to you so you can share some of the highlights.
Thank you, Jessica. So our interest in U.S. privacy stakeholders. So I'm going to report on the U.S. results, and then I'm going to hand it off to Minchang, who will talk about the EU results. I will say the U.S. results are a bit more detailed at this moment. It's because we did that analysis first, and so not that is just where we are in our process. So the reason we were interested in interviewing privacy stakeholders was as part of the larger TAP project. And part of what we were doing was issue spotting so that we could make the surveys more relevant to the stakeholder community. But while we had these folks, we were also really interested in asking them some questions about their work. And the reason is that in the US specifically, right now we lack general consumer privacy legislation. There's a patchwork of sector-specific and emerging state laws, but there's been a flurry of activity around privacy legislation, both at the federal and state level. So it's been this really fruitful phase for privacy legislation, for writing it, for proposing it, for hearings about it, if not fully successful. There's been lots of legislation and lots of new lawmaking at the state level, but so far, no federal privacy legislation has made it into law, although lots has been proposed in Congress. So we became really interested in privacy advocacy work, the nature of privacy advocacy work at this like sort of critical moment for U.S. privacy law. And specifically, we wanted to ask people while we had them there for interviews, what's hard about being a privacy advocate, and what strategies are successful for building influence with policymakers specifically. So we defined privacy advocates pretty broadly. We were interested in people who are trying to influence privacy and data protection through their work. So people who are doing this professionally, but that work could be research, it could be design, it could be reporting, it could be standards reporting like newspaper reporting or journalism, standard setting, it could be policy making. And so we looked for people who were publishing papers or publishing conference proceedings on privacy topics, people who were participating in privacy-focused meetings that were being held by, for instance, government agencies or industry groups. We looked at news coverage of privacy issues in mainstream US media outlets. And we looked at social media accounts discussing privacy issues. And we sort of slowly gathered names across 3 sectors. We were interested in folks working in academia, working for nonprofits and NGOs, and working in the media. We didn't talk to in this group folks working in industry, although lots of privacy folks work in industry. We were focused on the sort of advocacy sector. And from that list of names, we also performed snowball sampling. So when we talked to people, we asked them to recommend other people, much like the quantitative survey portion of our study. And we selected our sort of final sample for maximum diversity across the sectors. Although, as you can see, we had 13 academics, 9 representatives of NGOs, and only 1 journalist. We tried hard to get more journalists to talk to us. It was a challenge. So we are significantly underrepresenting the views of media in this reporting. So I just want to call attention to that. And we conducted these interviews over Zoom over the course of not quite a year, about 9 months between 2022 and 2023. And we were originally interested in forms of influence. But what we found when we were talking to folks is that our interviews became an accounting of 2 different topics: the challenges of exercising influence. So when we'd ask about influence, people would say, well, here's what's hard about that, right? So challenges, as well as strategies that advocates were successfully using to overcome those influence challenges to get influence on the process. And that's what I'm going to talk about now, is what kinds of challenges and strategies we saw. As we analyzed our data, we didn't come to this data with this idea, but as we analyzed it, we saw repeated infrastructural themes and qualities. Okay, what do I mean by infrastructural? I come from an academic tradition in which infrastructure studies is sort of one little piece. And these are people who study how people interact with infrastructure, how they build it, how they maintain it, how they use it. And infrastructure is sort of known for having very specific qualities. And we saw those qualities emerging in our interviews. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about those qualities, and then I'll show you how the interviews reflect those qualities. Infrastructure is embedded. It's existing, it's connected to existing social and technical attributes, right? It's like interlocked with lots of things. It's transparent and most visible upon breakdown. It's really easy to forget about infrastructures until they break. It has a temporal or spatial reach and scope. It exists over large amounts of time or space. It's not just in one place. It's something you learn how to build, how to use, how to maintain as part of membership in a community. So it's hard to learn to navigate by yourself. You are part of a community that learns to build or maintain or use it. It is both shaped by conventions of practice in a community. So it's malleable and it's impacted by the people who use it. It embodies standards or agreed upon conventions or rules. So there are certain rules that are solidified in its design or in policy about how to use it. And finally, it's built on an installed base. You never get to design an infrastructure from the ground up out of whole cloth. It has to be adapted to the systems and technologies that came before. So these qualities are qualities that we saw repeated again and again and again in our interviews. Most prominent among these was when people talked about the challenges of privacy advocacy. They talked about the relative invisibility of privacy and the fact that its importance becomes most visible when it breaks down. So for instance, P6 told us, it's just not the level at which people operate on a day-to-day basis, unless something terrible happens to them directly and they have a direct, unique experience with it. Then people become activated. Or P20 told us, and we love this quote, I think we need influencers. We need frickin' Ariana Grande to write a song about Signal, which is a private messaging app. When it becomes something that is, when people are thinking about the threats that they face and how to manage their own digital hygiene, I think that's where we need to be. So thinking about the invisibility, except for when things break, and maybe ways to increase that visibility, right, through influencers. A second theme we saw was that the community of practice that is engaged in privacy advocacy is kind of contested and sometimes lacks diversity. And that can create problems both of problem definition and diversity in what the problem is, as well as in the solution space. So P1, an academic, told us we still have a very liberal Western approach to privacy and how to think about it and how we legislate for it and how we critique things. Or P11, an academic, told us, so there's a tendency in the privacy community to, with very good intentions, speak on behalf of other people. Like privacy is important for political dissidents, or privacy is important for people in abusive relationships, or privacy is important for marginalized people in some group. I think this often comes with the best intentions, but there's a level of making assumptions or speaking for what those groups need, rather than either bringing their voices indirectly or advocating or working with them to amplify what they want. We also saw privacy advocates grappling with the installed base of, which in this case is the power of the data marketplace. There's already a marketplace that really relies on using personal data. And that's a pretty powerful installed base. So P15, who was from the media, said, as Amazon and Google have grown, so have their ability to lobby Congress and administrative agencies. And I think that's reflected in the fact that these profits that these companies have grown tremendously over the last decade. And I don't see a meaningful way of putting on the brakes. Or P16 at an NGO said, funding is obviously one of the biggest challenges, right? The reality is that we're massively outgunned in the policy context. So grappling with this installed base that's already there. The last challenge that we heard a lot about was that of trying to decide between competing values, which in infrastructure studies is a very common challenge that you see. When you put standards in place, you have to decide between competing values, and privacy advocates are wrestling with that. If we put data protection elements in place, we have to choose sometimes between values. So we heard people talking about, for instance, choosing between privacy and personalization or utility of different online or database applications. So P6 said, there's a lot of need in various parts of our government and in our economy and parts of our country for things that will save labor and will save time and will make things easier. And so I think people in a moment of exhaustion, a need to execute, will lunge for different technologies without thinking about the implications. We also saw privacy in tension with competition. P17, who was at an NGO, said, the ugly data broker, who everyone has decided is evil, is actually a place where certain parties get to compete in the market when they're small players. So that is, and another thing that people were worried about is a trade-off between privacy and competition. We also saw privacy advocates using infrastructural strategies to surmount these obstacles or to pass these barriers and to be successful. These were strategies that we saw. So the first strategy we saw again and again and again was storytelling, was the importance of good storytelling to make the invisible protections of privacy more visible to a broader audience. So for instance, P17 told us about, from an NGO, one of our staff was once profiled in Tire Magazine, which is evidently, if you run an auto dealership, Tire Magazine is on your desk. And we care about what auto dealers know or do with the data and how they explain to consumers about cars. And so Tire Magazine was surprisingly relevant to us. So thinking about different ways to tell their story and get it to audiences that might not have had it before. Folks also talked about ways to broaden the community that works on privacy advocacy. P17 said, it was an NGO, said, one of our strategies has been to try to broaden the debate. The most important thing recently, the most influential thing in privacy has been the advent of the civil rights community getting engaged. And so the fact that they've come in and they say, actually, we know a little bit about discrimination. And now that they're involved, we may actually have some hope of privacy legislation because they've got actual political influence. And the last strategy we saw a lot of is using existing knowledge infrastructures to build legitimacy and therefore get access to policymakers. And so that was publishing a lot of the time. So P19 said, being able to look around the corner and being able to publish on stuff that we know is heating up helps to get public awareness. And so when we come to them, decision makers, and say, hey, we want to push this bill, we think it's really important, they've heard our name before because, for example, they've seen the report. We also saw people using social media a lot. And in fact, lots of people said it was, quote unquote, as P9 says, weirdly important. So these interviews were done while Twitter was called Twitter. And so everybody refers to Twitter, but this P9 says, I think Twitter is actually weirdly important. So even if you're not on Twitter, even if you don't follow Twitter, I get the sense that people who do are going to be influenced by the people who are active. And so public visibility is really important, and social media was a platform to get that existing knowledge infrastructure. And interestingly, as Olga was speaking, I was reflecting on the fact that, for this project, we have built another knowledge infrastructure, right? This data-oriented tool for folks with this sort of exact same goal of trying to make privacy voices more visible and more present. So this infrastructural move is one that I think we even undertook without realizing that's what we were doing. Okay, why do we think these infrastructural approaches matter? We think there's a really interesting turn happening in privacy at the moment that these infrastructural both strategies and barriers support, which is that an attempt to recognize privacy as part of a substrate, as part of an important underlying set of needs for civil rights and liberties. That privacy isn't an end in itself, but is a means for ensuring civil rights and liberties in an age of data surveillance and surveillance capitalism. So it's interesting because I think that putting goals of privacy being infrastructural is reflecting infrastructural battles that are already happening and infrastructural strategies that advocates are using. It also helps bring, I think, these concepts from the background where they are now to the foreground within privacy advocacy. I think it may be useful to say, hey, what we're doing has infrastructural components, and we should maybe think about it explicitly that way. Infrastructural thinking also helps us explain why privacy advocacy can be such an uphill battle. We are not the first people who have had to fight an infrastructural battle, and it's almost always hard. Anytime you are trying to advocate for something that's not a kitchen table issue, it is hard. And other infrastructural studies folks have pointed this out in the past, so I think it's useful to connect us here. And finally, it can provide some new tools and concepts to frame privacy expertise, to better communicate the work of data protection advocates, and to imagine ways of increasing advocate influence. So with that, I am going to go forward and turn over to Min Chung to talk about our Europe findings.
Right, thank you. So I'll be sharing insights from our interviews with European privacy experts, which we compared with perspectives from the US experts. So our methodology was pretty much the same except for one difference, which was being able to recruit EU government officials who work directly with the GDPR and related privacy issues. Then we conducted interviews with 16 European policy experts in the spring of 2023 using Zoom. And for this study, Europe includes EU member states, the UK, and Switzerland to try to cover regions that have adopted GDPR or similar regulations. So we found that both US experts and EU experts have two common goals. The first revolves around the goal to protect and frame privacy as a fundamental right. The EU has already established privacy as a fundamental right, so the focus is on emphasizing the global benefits of protecting privacy rights. And EU government official, the EU10, emphasize it's not about money or welfare, it's about basic rights. And then in contrast, in the US, privacy is not yet an explicitly fundamental right, which leads experts to focus on linking privacy debates and laws to rights. So privacy is viewed more as a support role, such as how data protection laws can complement other enshrined rights. A quote from US 17, NGO representative says, "Nobody is going to elect somebody to office because of how they voted on a very specific wonky privacy thing," and highlights that privacy becomes a game changer in the US when it intersects with other major electoral issues. Then the second goal is to enforce existing laws and advocate for new ones. US experts acknowledge GDPR's significance, but points out its enforcement challenges. But ultimately, the US is behind. US 14 and academic expressed that US is lagging in privacy regulation due to a laissez-faire, hands-off approach. On the other hand, while the EU does have GDPR, EU experts recognize that GDPR's full potential hasn't been fully realized, with EU5 from an NGO pointing out there isn't enough litigation and there certainly isn't enough enforcement to test it. Then the next finding is an analysis of comparing the most influential actors in privacy conversations. In terms of regulatory influence, there is a regional variance. EU experts see data protection authorities as significant, and a couple even mention the word obvious influencers. Meanwhile, in the US, despite the lack of comprehensive federal privacy law, agencies like the FTC and the Census are still seen as key in shaping privacy discussions. This leads to a crucial point. Direct engagement with regulators is essential for influencing policy on both sides of the Atlantic. Lastly, we observed a contrast in how the experts describe the roles of US and EU academics. Experts note that US scholars are more outspoken and engaged in direct advocacy. So in summary, while the US and EU share common goals in privacy policy, there are differences in approaches and perceptions among experts and policymakers. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Katie and Minchon. So before we get to questions, and just as a reminder, you can feel free to drop questions in using the Q&A feature at any time, or you can wait just a little bit and you can actually ask your question live. But we're very excited to have with us today Paul Ohm. So Paul does not actually work on the TAP project, but we invited him to join us today to share some of his thoughts based on what we've been doing. So Paul's a professor of law at Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C., and he has a very extensive research career. I've been citing his work for well over a decade. His research focuses on information privacy, computer crime law, surveillance, technology in the law, and AI in the law. And he has served in many roles, both at Georgetown and nationally. So we're very happy to have you, Paul. And if you want to take 5 or 10 minutes and offer some of the things that you're thinking about based on what you've heard today, then we can move on to Q&A.
Hi, everyone. It's really a privilege to be here to listen to this work and reflect on it and think about how I'm going to be busily hitting refresh on that cool quantitative website to see the latest results. It's also a privilege to kind of think about the claims that are being made and the results that you have. And I understand that this is all tentative and to try and like squeeze that into frameworks I've been thinking about. I mean, I don't want to start with too long a caveat, but I'm a consumer of this kind of work. I do not produce this kind of work. I rely on people like the amazing scholars on this team to go out and survey people. I have seen, Jessica, thank you for noting the length of my career without referring to the gray hair on my head, but I have seen over the span of my career how vital quantitative and qualitative works, and particularly surveys and interviews with individuals, has been to profoundly moving debates that we have on the policy level. And so if I say only one thing that sticks with you, it's congratulations and keep going. I mean, this is vital work, and I trust this team to do it at the highest level. And by the way, it's really cool to stop and do webinars and to like do the hard work of building websites to share the data. Too often we just like hole up until we can get the publication done. So congratulations to you on that as well. You know, I didn't actually read a lot of these results before now. I'm absorbing that with the rest of you. So these might be a little unfocused, but I saw two themes that I wanted to highlight first, and they're partially questions, but they're also just like my advice to the team about what might be interesting around the corner that you all could be on the front row of learning about, and then probably two or three littler questions toward the end. Okay, so the two big themes. Number one, I wrote here in my notes, this is such an unstable time to be doing this work. And then I thought, is that always true? Is that like an evergreen statement? So I thought, well, what if they had done this right around Edward Snowden? Or what if they had been doing this around Cambridge Analytica? Or what if they had been doing this around Frances Haugen? And so maybe our life is just chaos and we need to learn from it. But our particular flavor of chaos, at least to me, seems super distinctive. And I'm talking about the artificial intelligence turn and the way that the kind of growth in artificial intelligence tools in their own power, but more importantly, how it's just scrambling all of our law and policy debates, makes this a methodologically super complicated time to be like trying to say things about how attitudes are changing. But it also puts you on the front row of like chronicling what's happening, trying to make sense of what's happening. If you ever visit my website and you look like in sentence one, like a lot of scholars, I say, Paul is a scholar of, and I added artificial intelligence about 18 months ago, even though I've been writing about big data, remember that, for far longer. I don't think I'm alone, right? I think every person you are likely to be interviewing is wondering when it's time to change their bio on their firm website or their academic website. I think they're doing like me and reading a lot about, you know, large language models in off hours. But I think more interestingly and more importantly, as you're studying this field, we are redefining what our field even is. And so it might almost be a little quaint to say that you're focused on privacy, because I'm not even sure we know where privacy begins and ends anymore. If I can share one anecdote, I was at this amazing conference last summer of generative AI engineers meeting with legal scholars. And we got to a privacy panel, and I realized that when they used the word privacy, they meant, you know, social security numbers being revealed by large language models. That was the beginning and end of their definition. And I went up there and I said, okay, I'm about to blow your minds. You know, I think of deepfakes as a privacy problem. I think of misinformation and disinformation most days as a privacy problem. And then I went further and I said, privacy is any information harm that is not intellectual property. And just like, it was such a like audacious claim that I don't really believe, but it is a way of saying that the boundaries around the field you're purporting to study are more in flux now than I think at any time in my career. And so you should chronicle that if you can. You should think about how that maybe changes who you invite to be interviewed. So for example, I spend most of my time, and I'm about to publicly shame them, like yelling at copyright scholars who have no idea what they're talking about, but suddenly they are like delving into information harms that they've never thought about, bias, discrimination, all of these things. So maybe you should start, like, I don't know, adding a few privacy curious copyright scholars and copyright practitioners to the people you interview. Okay, so that's number one. Number one is, this is this AI moment. Good luck. and please teach us what you're learning about it. Number two, and here I'm going to commit the cardinal sin of just saying, well, here's what I've been thinking of and how it relates to your project. There seems to be a real individual person focus, at least so far in the way you're presenting these results. And yet in my world, most of the people kind of I'm following most closely seem to really be taking a hard turn to studying institutions instead of individuals, right? And maybe that's all in your data. Maybe you're building up kind of data about the institutions these people represent and their strengths and weaknesses. And so just to put a little meat on the bones, I've read in the last couple of months 3 different articles that are weirdly and surprisingly critical of civil society organizations. The 2 I'll name by name is Brenda Devoskin, a postdoc here, has an article on civil society. Ari Waldman has a burn the building down new article on civil society. And so, if you have some of your people are NGO representatives, there's about to be a lot of critical and I think productive discourse in other fields about, are these organizations working? Are they not working? Are they different from one another? And knowing what individuals do is part of that story, but it feels like it's part of a broader story as well. I could have said the exact same thing about agencies or law firms or companies. And I did love the slide with the kind of insights about different companies. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 2 is maybe we're not only in an AI moment, but we're also in a institutions moment. Let me just have some smaller points to end on. Number 1, I love the kind of focus on infrastructure. Julie Cohen has been writing recently some drafts about infrastructure, so I've been kind of engaging with this same STS literature you've been talking about, although I'm still just getting started. I was a little confused in your presentation what the infrastructure was, right? Is it privacy? Is it?
So are we.
Is it privacy advocacy? Is it databases? Is it data systems, right? And I think on your slides, I saw a little slipperiness between which maybe it's infrastructures, right?
Mm-hmm.
My second, I guess I'll have 3 littler questions. My second question is, given the timing of some of these interviews, I wonder how much you asked about the DMA and the DSA and the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. I mean, legislation is hard to do and doesn't happen that often. And we're living in this age of like major movement. And so again, it might be really nice for you all to share with us what you're learning about, how the sausage was made, to use the old metaphor. And then the third one is maybe the big question, which is, there were hints in some of your slides of like, we're going to turn this not only, that our goal is not only detached and neutral, dispassionate observation, but also like playbook production, right? Like how could they use the infrastructural turn to be better advocates? And I just am curious, as a bunch of social scientists, do you like shy away from that? Is that not this project? Or is that like something that you're thinking about incorporating in your project? But the last thing I'll say is congratulations and thank you for including me in your reflected glory. This is a very cool project. I appreciate it.
I mean, this is why we're so glad to have you here, Paul, because this is exactly the kind of stuff we wanted, this feedback. So thank you for doing it publicly and taking the time to do it. I think, and we'll start, and we have Q&A now. So, but if it's okay, Trent, I will just take a second to say a little bit about what we were thinking about some of these things. So the institutions issue, I think we have that data, but it's latent. And so your idea of making it a focal point is one we should do. And so we will. That's a really, really smart turn. And I really like that. The infrastructure thing is super slippery. So I will say this data right now is under review for a community of people who it's a computer supported cooperative work, who's sort of blend STS and design, which is why you're seeing the descriptive and then at the end a playbook, because that's like a very CSCW move to be like, oh, and also we'll tell you how to do things based on what we saw, right? And whether or not it works or not, I don't know. Like that paper's got to get reviewed. But I do think we are trying to sort of do both. And this infrastructure question about what is the infrastructure? So we started by sort of saying, well, privacy, we think privacy is the infrastructure, but it doesn't work quite because, yeah, right. Privacy is made up of a lot of different things, some of which is conceptual, some of which is physical, some of which is in the middle, practice-based stuff, right? And so that in itself is hard to describe as an infrastructure. But what we were seeing is this wiggle word we're using is infrastructural qualities, right? Like we're seeing these qualities of infrastructure over and over again. And we think that's meaningful. We think it means something, but we can't quite say what that something is, except for that maybe our work should be infrastructural in nature, but like not an infrastructure, right? I would love to keep talking about this because I don't think we quite have it yet, right? But like these conversations will help us figure it out. So thank you.
Okay, I want to introduce Trent Buskirk, the only person on the call who hasn't been introduced yet. And Trent is one of the few members of the TAP team who is not at UMD or LMU. Trent recently joined the School of Data Science at Old Dominion, was one of the founding faculty members, and he's been focused more on the survey and sampling side. Trent is going to moderate the Q&A. So now is the time, if you have been sitting on a question, to raise your hand and or drop it in the Q&A feature. And Trent might also have a couple questions up his sleeve as well. So Trent, take it away.
Thank you, Jessica. Great job, teammates. Really nice to hear some of these results sort of culminating as a result of all the efforts that we've been doing either on the front end or the back end or the middle of the project. Really exciting to be a part of it today. So we don't have any questions posted yet, but there might be a few questions that people are interested in the data tool. So I would like to sort of park for a moment on the data tool just to give you all a sense of how you might be able to use it and how frequently we might be updating it. So I'd like to turn our attention to Olga, who is the creator and sort of keeper of our beautiful tool. And she might be able to answer a few questions about how frequently are we going to update the tool? So how frequently can we look for updates? And what kind of support might we offer if you want to use information on our tool and need additional clarifications? Where do you go? What kind of support can we offer? So Olga, really appreciate some insights into those questions. Thank you.
Sure. So since we are, the project is live, right? So we will be getting more data, and not all the data are online yet. So we have some qualitative questions or open-ended questions that we haven't clustered into bigger groups yet. So that would be the first additions as soon as it's done. And then we have a tool that is online. So when the results are done, I'm sure within the next few weeks after we collect the results, we will be able to put it directly on the tool because it's not hard. And I'm sure everyone would be excited to see the data coming very fast for everyone to use. The data, the access to raw data or microdata is also possible. And we are working with the German Social Science Archive to store our data there. So anyone who wants to access raw data and do more deeper analysis can do that. And what else? What was the last one? Sorry.
What kind of support might we offer?
Right, the most important one. Yeah, so we would be really happy if people could use the data for their analysis, whether it's a, I don't know, LinkedIn post to a student paper, to a thesis, to a newspaper article. And we would be happy to help with interpretation or check your interpretation. So please feel free to contact us, and we will be happy to help you to use our data for better good.
Thank you, Olga. If you have more questions about the tool or think of them as we are on the Q&A, please go ahead and type it into the Q&A option. We'll be happy to entertain those questions. We did have a question that came in for Paul, which I'll get to in a second. But before I get there, I was wondering if we might be able to inform our audience as to sort of how long we're going to be studying these experts over time, just to give people a sense of how often we might see updates and how long this is going to go on. So anybody want to take that question?
Oh, it's such a good Frauke question, but she's not here today. So our amazing leader, Frauke Kreuter, couldn't be here today. But she is, I mean, has made all of this possible. I think we would like to keep this panel format and regular, by your questioning operating as long as we can, because I think exactly as Paul said, we're in this moment of like vast change, and We hope to keep documenting it. I think it's useful to keep documenting it, but it will depend on funding and keeping it alive.
Yeah, I think the project goes on for at least another year, so you can sort of look for those updates along the way. But beyond that, I think this is exactly the sentiment of the team. Question came in for Paul, so I will ask that question now. The attendee asks, what would be of interest to you to learn from privacy stakeholders if you could ask many of them at a time? So not sort of individual, but sort of in groups. What would you like to learn from them?
I love that I've been asked a question. I mean, so I did note on one of these slides that this team seems to be inviting us to actually give questions. And so I'm sure you're already thinking about this, but going to the Privacy Scholars Conference and asking them either formally or in the hallways to submit questions is great. I'm thinking a little bit, of course, about the upcoming election. I mean, it might be, I don't know if that's too small bore or big bore to be studying, but what does that mean for privacy policy this year in the United States, especially? And then everything I was saying about the AI jump ball we find ourselves living in. The last thing I'll say is, like, I hope you're talking to policymakers or will eventually to give you questions to ask your panels, because I think they're much more interesting than asking me what I would ask, right? I want to know what the Federal Trade Commission, right, would want you to ask these people, and other agencies like that. So good, thanks.
Thank you. We have another question. This is around the social media discussion that we started to have earlier. And the attendee points out that a lot of younger folks are getting a ton of information, for good, bad, or indifferent, from TikTok. And so the question is whether or not, and maybe around the privacy implications of that platform in addition to this. So they ask, for the playbook part of the work, have you thought about reaching this demographic of folks beyond NGOs, academics, and journalists for the project?
This is a great question. So I'm going to answer part of it, and then I want to turn this to Anna Lenhart, because she has actually studied TikTok users and their privacy concerns. But so for the first part, we talked a lot in this project about the sampling of privacy experts, privacy stakeholders, and how to define that, and whether, so it was easy to define a sort of group of professional privacy, people whose job this is, right? But we talked a lot about, is there a segment of people who are advocates in their personal lives and who may be on social media, who may be community organizers, who may be, but aren't professional privacy folks, right? And I think Paul's point that we maybe need to be thinking about data harms as a broader category, or AI is another, sort of way this might get described, but we might have some other keywords here. I think we're more and more likely to see advocates who are using social media, but who aren't professionals in this space, right? And that we need to think about how to capture those folks. We had trouble figuring out who they might be or how we would find them, right? But social media might be one of those answers. So I like this question quite a bit. And then Anna, I know that you have some background noise where you are, but I wondered if you wanted to just say just a little bit about what you were seeing among TikTok users.
Yeah, what we're seeing among TikTok users, so TikTok users are young, disproportionately. And so many of them have been aware of sort of a digital footprint for all of their lives and have made the decision to join these platforms because they believe the benefits outweigh the privacy risks. But they are very aware of the privacy risks. They can speak to you pretty eloquently about surveillance advertising and marketing, and they understand there are third parties getting their data. I mean, it's quite sophisticated. And then one thing that happened during our data collection, during my data collection with with TikTok users, is this hearing around TikTok and its ties to China and should it be banned in the United States. That actually went viral on TikTok. So I think getting to this question is that TikTok is also a space for discourse. It has key affordances that allow for debates and duets, and you saw this with the actual TikTok hearing itself. And then the TikTok users knew that, and they knew that argument, and they knew that there were these surveillance influence issues with the Chinese Communist Party. And so it is definitely a space I think we could be spreading more of this, but it is also like a pretty informed and thoughtful group of users. And I think many scholars have found that actually.
I have another question for the panel, and we may sort of help the attendees understand sort of where we're going next. So could anyone sort of foreshadow what our next sort of line of inquiry is in the panel, just to give people a sense of maybe they'll come back to our beautiful data tool and look for these results very soon?
Who wants to speak to Wave
Let's
4?
see, yeah, Olga, do you have the update on Wave 4?
I think Mariel would be. I know she's in the audience, and she would be the person to speak most about it. Well, the Wave 4 will be full of rotating questions because we recently finished the Wave 3, and it's not long enough to repeat the questions that we want to repeat. So we'll have to wait until the Wave 5 to repeat the questions. And as for exact questions, so I think there might be questions about the AI because it's an important topic and the AI regulation. And then we were also thinking of expanding on what respondents think about the most important privacy issues if they have changed since they were asked before. So trying to see how we can follow up and if the discourse is actually changing. But that one, like some really brush strokes, and we would be happy to include more questions. And if participants have ideas, they should contact us, and we will include the questions.
Okay, we don't have any other questions in the Q&A queue, so I think I'll turn it back over to our hosts, and we can close out for today.
Great. Well, thank you all. Thanks to everyone who served as a panelist today. Thank you to everyone who joined us and as an attendee. We hope that you took something away from this. As a reminder, go to privacyperceptions.org if you want to learn more about the project, see the data, or if you have any suggestions or want to get more information about participating. And this webinar will be posted on the SoDa website at umd.edu. Probably next week. So enjoy the rest of your data privacy week. And for folks at UMD, enjoy first week of the academic semester. And thank you again.